like share the story of crossing the Atlantic like this, and so I really appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate all you guys coming out to hear the story. I will tell you that before I get started, just a little bit here, that when you're crossing the ocean like this, there are lots and lots of days where all you're doing is sitting and watching the ocean go by. And like the wind is perfect, the waves are great. I mean, I was going through some of the updates that I had sent to my family as I was preparing this, and I was also taking a look at, I actually kept a journal for most of the trip. And like, I mean, there was one entry where we had 3 consecutive days of just beautiful wind coming from behind the boat. It's what we call downwind sailing. And really what we had, I would describe as champagne sailing, because there were just nice, easy waves coming from behind, and the boat would get picked up and get put back down, and nothing really major. You didn't have to change the sails, and the autopilot just kind of took care of everything for you. But those days do get punctuated by a little bit of like, oh my God, what am I doing here? Because you got waves that you really were not expecting and wind that you were not expecting. They also got punctuated by some incredible beauty. I lost track of how many times we saw dolphins just swimming alongside the boat. In fact, one day I was out doing a sail change, and we stopped in the middle of the sail change because and I'll show you a picture of the boat here in a little bit with a diagram as well, so you got an idea, but you could actually look down through. There's some netting on the front of this boat. You could look down through it, and you saw the dolphins like just right in between the 2 hulls of the boat, just jumping right underneath you. It was just absolutely incredible. So when I started preparing for this speech, for this talk, I was like, man, there's like a lot of days where really in some ways it almost felt like it was, dare I say, boring. But then there were really a lot of days that, I mean, there were several days too where it was like, wow, this is like really amazing. And there were days too that were just like, wow, this is a little bit on the scary side. Although I never feared for my life. But there were a few times I was like, wow, this is maybe more than I thought I was getting, but it still was incredible. So thank you. Sorry for that long introduction, but thank you again for coming. One of the biggest things that I get asked is like, because I've lived in Wyoming now since 1997, like what got you onto a sailboat crossing the Atlantic Ocean in the first place? Like, why would you even do this? This is not the exact boat, but this is the kind of boat that kind of got me started into sailing. My grandfather, when I was growing up in Connecticut, this is a Cape Dory 25, so it's a 25-foot boat. Cape Dory is the brand or the manufacturer. And we would go visit him when I was growing up. At the time, we lived in Florida. We'd go up to Connecticut. My grandfather would take us out on his boat and take us all out sailing in Long Island Sound, or right off the Thames River in Connecticut. And it really was a pretty incredible experience as a kid. And probably one of the things actually that was the biggest influence, I mean, in addition to actually being out there on the water, was the last summer that we had the opportunity to sail with him. He gave me a book called The Boy Who Sailed Around the World Alone by Robin Lee Graham. And Robin, in 1965, he was 16. He left Los Angeles in a 32-foot monohull, similar to this boat, a little bit bigger, and sailed from Los Angeles to Hawaii, and then proceeded to sail around the world by himself. Usually had some cats with him, but yeah, so I'm like 11, 12 years old, and I'm reading this book about this kid who is really not much older than me, and he's visiting these incredible places around the world. And I'm like, this is amazing. And I really got bit by the sailing bug through my grandfather and through that book. We moved to Germany, moved to North Dakota, not really lots of opportunities for sailing where we were living. And I kind of had forgotten about sailing, and just started teaching, got married, had 2 great kids. Didn't really think much about sailing anymore, or even about the ocean a lot. I mean, I took my son to the ocean. I don't even remember when that was, but it was like kind of one of those things, like people from Wyoming, right? We go to the beach for vacation, and that's what it is. And in 2020, my wife and I started to reevaluate a little bit of how we were living life. And we were living over in Cheyenne at the time, and we said we want to do something a little bit different. So in 2021, we sold our house and 80% of our possessions, moved into a rental to finish out the school year, liquidated all but I think 6 tubs of like memorabilia that keepsakes and stuff, which we are still with my brother-in-law in Utah. But we sold everything else. We hopped into a Ford Expedition, drove around the country just a little bit, and moved on board this boat here, which is actually the boat that we currently own. This is a Lagoon 410. It's a catamaran. We absolutely loved living on this boat. It actually was, as we made our way south in Florida, it was incredible. But we just ran into a lot of setbacks that were unexpected. We had planned financially for being able to do maintenance on the boat. We hadn't expected some of the catastrophe level events that happened to us to happen. So in January of 2025, that's this year, isn't it? That was just a few months ago. In January of this year, we moved our boat from Biscayne Bay, which is right around the Miami area, up to St. Augustine, and we put her on land and put her up for sale. In fact, she's still up for sale. So if you know anybody who's looking for a Lagoon 410, I know a guy. But we decided that even though we were putting this boat up for sale, we did not want to give up boat life. My wife was working as an online teacher, and I was not working last spring. So one of the things that we were talking about, that whether this boat sells or doesn't sell, or we go get another boat for ourselves later on, we want me to have my captain's license so that we can actually do day charters with our boat, charge people to come on board for 4 hours to sail around the Chesapeake or something like that. And you can do pretty well with that. But anyway, so I started looking for opportunities to be crew on other boats. And really, I wasn't looking to get paid. I was looking for sea time. And you can find opportunities like this on Facebook. You can find them. There's websites that are devoted to it. And in fact, I found a website called Crew Bay. And Crew Bay is actually where I found this boat here. And this is the boat that I crossed the Atlantic on. The boat's name is Prima 4. So it stands for Privilege and Mac and 4. The brand of the boat is a Privilege. Mac is the owner's family name, and there were 4 of them when they crossed from Europe to the Caribbean. So he took his boat to the Caribbean. They sailed around for a year and a half, sailed it up to Virginia, where he put it into dry storage for about a year, and he wanted it moved back to Italy. So he put an ad out on Crew Bay and said, I'm looking for about 4 people. I don't care if you're super experienced sailing. I'm just looking for 4 people who can help me move my boat across the Atlantic. So I reached out to him and I said, hey, Michael, here's my story, and gave him our story, and said, I really would love to do this. And he said, all right, come on board. And he picked two other people. I was the only American on board. Michael and the other two crew members, all three were German. And all three spoke English, but they also, a lot of times, if things were particularly stressful, they would default to German, and I would be like, okay, I'm gonna sit back and just wait for a couple minutes here, because they'll tell me what I need to do if I need to do something, but I can see right now everybody's got things handled. That's not to say that I just spent the whole time sitting back, but there were times, you know, where it was like they were shouting at each other in German, and it was like, all right, I'll just wait for some direction here. The Privilege, the boat name is a Privilege 460, or boat brand is a Privilege 465. So it's about a 47-foot long boat, 24 feet wide. But to say it's 47 by 24 it's not like a 47 by 24 box, okay? One of the things you can see here, the hulls are separated, and this middle section of the boat is actually well above the water line. So even though it's 47 by 24, it's not like you have 800 square feet of space that's available to you. This is just a schematic of this boat, or a similar boat. So you've got your cabins. You've got two cabins in the aft portion, one in each hull. And then forward, so these beds right here are actually sitting above the water. So you walk down one of those hulls and you're actually in the hull, and then you climb into your bed and you're actually over the water. But you do have your own private space. We had 4 bathrooms on board. We had one that we used specifically for a shower. Right in the middle here, this area here, it's kind of a couch and dining room table. There's a galley kitchen right here, and all of that's in that in-between area. So it's actually kind of comfortable. It really is pretty comfortable in there. But you do have some limited space, right? I mean, this is not like moving into a 800, 900 square foot apartment. You want to be limited in what you have with you, and you want to make use of the space you have. Like I said, Prima 4 was actually stored on land for about a year before we got there. And like these boats are not the kind of boats you put on a trailer, obviously, and tow to your slate. These have to be in special slings like that with these lifts to be able to put them in and out of the water. It's really quite a process to watch them do it, because they've got to get things lined up, get it right into this spot, lower the boat into the water. And once the boat is in the water, we immediately start to check to make sure that all the systems are going to be functional. The first thing we did was to try to fire up the engines. And I put an emphasis on the word try, because the boat had been sitting for a year and the starter batteries had lost most of their charge. Fortunately, the marina crew actually had some portable jump starting bricks, and they were able to get the engines started. But that meant that once we got moved over into another slip or another dock, that we had to replace the starter batteries. You can also see from this picture here, there are no sails on the boat at the time. So we've also, as a crew, we've got to get the sails back on the boat. When you're going to store your boat like this for a long time, you take the sails off, because critters like to nest in there. And you really don't want birds or rats or things like that. They will tear up your sails pretty good.
Where's the propeller?
The propellers are actually, there's one on each side, and they are in the aft or the back end of the boat. So they would be on this schematic, right, there'd be one here and one here, roughly. So that's where, yeah, you can, you can't see it real well, but there's the shadow of it right in here. So we probably spent 3 days getting this boat ready, just putting the sails on, replacing starter batteries, making sure that all of the other systems were functioning. One of the big systems that you want to make sure that's functioning is all of your electronics, your autopilot, your chart plotter, your VHF radio. Actually, the VHF radio was a little bit funny because we were sitting at anchor one night, had the VHF radio on, and we hear this ferry come on the VHF, and the ferry captain says, Navy police boat, Navy police boat, Navy police boat. This is whatever ferry. Finally, the Navy police boat responds because we're really close to Norfolk. And the police boat responds and the ferry says, next time you come screaming by my ferry like that, I want you to think about what your wake is going to do to my boat and my passengers. And I was kind of chuckling a little bit. And then the captain proceeded to say, as a general reminder, this whole area is a no wake zone, so you just need to slow down. I'm like, I can't really imagine talking to a police like that even. Once we got things together, once we had all of our systems functioning though, like I said, it took us about 3 days. We start doing weather watching and we start moving the boat from where it was tied to the dock at this point, down south a little bit to Norfolk. We had some paperwork that we had to do to be able to leave the country. A couple of other things. One of the other things we had to do was some provisioning, which meant not just buying all the food for the boat, but finding places to store the food. So all of our fresh fruits and vegetables, we found these nets and just hung these all over the cockpit. In fact, this is sitting right over the dinghy. You had to lean out. When I wanted an apple, I had to climb up a little bit onto the back and lean out over into this net to try to grab an apple to calm seasickness or something when that hit. But we spent another 4 or 5 days just around the Chesapeake so that the four of us could get to know each other and work together so that we knew how the boat was going to work. And even actually just being in the Chesapeake was really, really cool. The day before we left, we're at anchor when I took this picture. That's the USS Gerald R. Ford. It's a little over 1,000 feet long. And I'm watching this aircraft carrier go by. And like it blocks the entire entrance to our anchorage for a couple of minutes, it seemed like. I mean, it was just crazy. And watching us go by. And then I'm thinking about this. I'm like, that ship goes out into the Atlantic, into the open Atlantic. And it's over 1,000 feet long. And I'm on a boat that's 46 feet long. And I'm about to go into the open Atlantic. But it was pretty cool to see that and all the other ships there. But it really was kind of a reminder as to like how small we really were heading out there. It was pretty cool. So we headed out, I think it would have been about April 23rd or so. I guess the exact date doesn't quite matter. This is our overall course for the first leg of the trip. We left Norfolk, Virginia, and we headed, this is Horta in the Azores on the island of Fayal is, I believe, how you pronounce it. The whole trip actually took us about 17 days, a little over 17 days. But when we left, as we watched the weather, things looked really good, and we said, we're gonna make a straight shot. We're gonna go ahead and try to go straight across to the Azores without stopping. We did allow ourselves about 3 days. So right about here actually is Bermuda. And we figured if the weather was starting to turn sour, we could always cut south and go to Bermuda and wait it out. It would probably take us about 2 days from that point to get there. But after the 3-day mark, we were like, we're committed. We're going all the way at this point. No stops in Bermuda. Which, really would have been, it would have been kind of cool to stop in Bermuda, but at the same time, I was really eager just to be like out on the open water like this. In fact, the first day that we were out, we were probably about 50 miles, 40 miles offshore, and they're actually building a wind farm right off the Virginia coast, about 40 or 50 miles off there. And we could see two windmills operating, and we could see the base of the other ones. It was like, oh wow, we want to stay out of this. We're gonna steer out of this range here. But after that 3-day mark, weather was still really good. Things looked really good on the forecast, so we just kept on going. And actually, I think it was probably about day 4 when the choice to turn back was not a choice anymore. I woke up about 6:30 in the morning, and I went upstairs, or went up into the cockpit, and I noticed that, I see that one of my shipmates, her name is Katie, she's sitting at the helm, and she's just finishing her shift. And typically not at the helm, because we had an autopilot that would just take care of the direction for us. And so I'm like, what in the world is going on? And the other thing that I realized is things aren't as smooth as they were when I went to bed. And I looked out back, and we had anywhere between 8 and 12-foot waves coming from behind us. And they were really close together. And I say close together, I would say it probably was about 6 to 8 seconds between waves. So it was just up and down and up and down. It was just, and I'm like, what's going on? She said, oh, overnight the wind picked up, and it picked up to probably 35, 40 miles an hour. Thankfully still coming from right behind us. So the waves picked up with that, and you have to hand steer at that point, because you can't, the autopilot just can't handle it. And when you're hand steering, you're trying to keep your boat to the right wind angle so that the wind is still pushing you. The waves are also turning you as you're coming down, and you want to make sure that as you're steering, you're not going to like slam too hard into the wave ahead of you as well. So it takes some practice, which we had 36 hours of practice doing that. By the end of it, I think I actually got pretty decent at it. Was not as good as the others. Jacob actually at one point was really super excited. He came running in because he hit 17 miles an hour coming down a wave. Most of the time on this trip, we were doing about 8 to 10 miles an hour is what we were sailing at. When we saw this sail go up, this is called a parasail, and when we saw this sail go up, or when the decision was made to put it up, we knew things were going to be good. This is what they call a downwind sail, so the wind is basically coming from right behind you. It's not going to be more than about 18, 20 miles an hour, so it's just really nice, perfectly smooth sailing. And there were several points on this trip when we had this sail up for 3 days at a stretch. It was like, oh, this is just incredible. And Michael, the boat owner, would be like, yeah, this is what it was like for 2 solid weeks going from Europe to the Caribbean. We actually did have some days, though, where we would put this sail up and we're like, all right, we're good. 2 hours later, it was like, okay, we need to drop the sail now because the wind has gotten too strong, or it's shifted direction, or you take your pick of things that caused us to change sails. I think at one point I counted we actually changed sail configurations 4 times between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m., which meant running, people were running out to the front of the boat, dropping this sail, pulling out the head sail up in front, putting the main sail up. I mean, it's a process. So to do it 4 times really is actually quite a bit of work. One of the things that was absolutely incredible, though, on this entire visit this entire trip was the wildlife that we got to see. Here, and this is just a short video, You can kind of see some dolphins there off the back of the boat. Like I said, we had dolphins a lot, and they were really a lot of fun to watch. Um, I had a little bit of time to Google like different dolphin species, and I think these were almost always what they call common dolphins. So they're smaller, probably about 6 or 8 feet in length, but they travel in pods of 6 or 8 and just bounce around next to the boat. It was really amazing to watch. One of the other really, actually, truly amazing things on this trip in terms of wildlife was after that 36 hours of really rough seas, things had settled down a little bit. They still weren't great, but they'd settled down. And I'm sitting in the back of the boat, just kind of looking out, watching the ocean go by. And I see this huge black fin sticking out of the water. And I'm kind of looking at it because I'm like, that is not a wave, and that's not a shark. I don't really know what that is. So I went ahead and called to the rest of the crew. I'm like, hey guys, get out here. There's something really cool you got to see. And they came out, and we're watching this dorsal fin just go across the back of the boat. It was maybe 1/8 of a mile away from us. I'm guessing it was about 6 feet tall. And all of a sudden, we saw this orca just barely breach the water, but it was enough that you could see the big white patch. And it was just like, wow. It was just amazing to see this. And then not 10 minutes later, we had what we think was a juvenile sperm whale actually swim like right up to the boat. It stopped as we were coming by it. It stopped and basically watched us go by. And I could have leaned over, had I gone down the steps on the back of the boat, I could have leaned over and touched this thing. It was like, wow, this is what I love about doing this. Being able to see that kind of wildlife, it was just incredible.
Did you ever swim in the ocean?
We actually did. When we got close to Africa, things finally warmed up enough. We were in about 9,000 feet of water, and we had to drop the sail because one of the rods that helps it hold its shape was starting to come out, so we had to drop the sail so we didn't lose that, because once that goes, it's not like anybody's chasing after it. So we dropped the sails, and it really had warmed up a lot. We were actually a day from Tangiers, and said, this is a great opportunity to go swimming. So we just killed the engines at that point. Sails were in, the boat's just floating, and 3 of us at a time would just jump off the back of the boat or jump off the front and go swimming. And it was really crazy because you dive off the boat and you're diving into 9,000 feet of water. And you're like, what am I doing? This is crazy. But it was just incredibly clear water. But you just looked down in there and it was like, all of a sudden you couldn't see anymore. It really was cool. Some of the other, jumping back real quick to the wildlife, some of the other wildlife we saw, that's actually a jellyfish. And these were like almost in swarms. And we would see these, and when we first saw them, we all thought they were maybe some kind of a balloon, because we had seen, even 400 miles offshore, had seen mylar balloons floating. Or maybe we thought they were bottles, and then we started noticing, oh wait, there's actually a lot of these out here. And I had brought most of my camera gear with me, so I busted out my big zoom lens to be able to take this picture. And I was like, oh, that's a jellyfish. And then when we started really looking and saw them coming like closer to the boat, it was like, oh wow, jellyfish are just floating by us. This is kind of funny. The most unique thing, I think, this is a Eurasian collared dove. We were 700 miles offshore from the Azores, and this bird just landed on our boat. Stuck with us for about 12 hours. If you got too close, it would fly a big loop and then come back and land in another spot on the boat. But it was like, wow, this is really crazy. After about 12 hours, we think it flew over to a cargo ship. that came within a mile of us, but it was just gone. So I don't know, maybe an orca got it too. That like I said at the start, there are a lot of days that you just sit and watch the ocean, and sunsets are like this, and you can see rain in the clouds. We did our absolute best to avoid any kind of low pressure system, because those are going to bring with them lots and lots of really bad weather, heavy rain, heavy seas, heavy wind. So because we had Starlink, we had access to like twice a day updating our weather forecast. We also had radar, so when there were isolated squalls, we could actually see them on the radar and go, oh, yeah, we're going to adjust course so that we don't run into this particular squall. Because you really just, you'd like to avoid it if possible.
Is that the explanation why your course was a little jig?
Yes, yeah. The other part of that too, actually, that's a really good question. Jumping back to that, the other reason that it's kind of all over the place like that is that there were times where if we tried to head due east, we wouldn't get the wind from the right direction to be able to move the boat. So we would turn south a little bit so that we could get better wind, or we turn north so that we could get, maybe we were in a spot that we were doing okay in terms of wind, but if we turned north a little bit, like right in here, we actually turned that way because then we had wind coming from a better direction, and the waves then were coming from a better direction too. Waves coming from behind were always like the greatest thing. When you get waves coming from multiple sides at once, that's when seasickness kicks in.
Did you have to make corrections for cargo ships and stuff?
Not usually. We had one instance with a cargo ship when we were in fact, probably about the halfway point. No, it was like the second night out. Sorry, it wasn't even the halfway point. It was the second night out. We had a cargo ship call us because we had our running lights on, but they couldn't see our running lights. They could see us on radar, but not on running lights. So they called us and said, hey, can you guys fix your running lights? And we're like, we've got them on, but we had a second set that we then turned on. And they're like, oh yeah, we see you. So cargo ships, when you're out there, cargo ships will actually make course adjustments for you. Now, when you get closer to busy ports, the expectation is you get out of their way. In fact, actually, when we got all the way to Tangiers, cargo ships were everywhere. And that became a thing like really quick. All of us became high alert. We're watching all around us, making sure that we were not going to run into one, because yeah, they're not going to move for you in those cases. After 17 days, that was our first sight of land, the island of Fayal. And Jacob had been outside just kind of checking things out, and he comes inside and says, well, he didn't say anything. He just had this grin on his face. And we're like, what? What's out there? He goes, there's something big sticking out of the water. And we're like, what do you mean? And he's like, I don't know, there's something big. And we all ran out there and we saw the land, and we're like, we're almost there. We are going to be at anchor tonight. No more waves. You can kind of see, but pictures never do it justice. Coming in here, we were on the very outside edge of a low pressure system that was moving towards us. So we probably had 6 to 8 foot waves here coming from the side. So the boat is doing this sideways, and we were so excited because we knew in a couple of hours we were going to be in a protected harbor. We were going to be at anchor. It was going to be good. The next day we knew we were going to be on land. I actually, just me being me, started fantasizing about what kind of food I might actually get. I was like, ooh, I want a pizza. About an hour later, we were a little bit closer, and you can see how much things had cleared up for us. This is just another part of the island there. We rounded this, and then we got into the port of Horta. Um, that port is actually a really big stopping place for transatlantic sailors. They stop there because it really is about 2,600 miles from Virginia, probably about 3,000 miles from different places in the Caribbean. So people will stop there before going on the rest of the way to Europe so they can resupply, do boat repairs, that kind of stuff. And we did have some boat repairs that needed to be done. We had to get some engine work done on one of our engines. We also had to work on the bimini. It got torn in some of the wind, so we had to find somebody who had a sewing machine that could fix that for us. But people will spend several days there just as a kind of like, okay, we can make the next 1,600 miles. It'll be okay. Or 1,200, I guess it was. But one of the really cool things, and this is the crew, obviously that's me. This is Jacob, that's Michael, the boat owner, and that's Katie. But one of the really cool things around Horta is people will paint on the concrete in this harbor area the name of their boats, and they'll do all kinds of things. Katie and Jacob painted the boat, and they paint the crew in the year that you crossed the Atlantic and were there. And so when you go walking around this port of Horta, you actually have got you've got like an artistic history of transatlantic crossings. There's ours a little bit better. But when I say you've got an artistic history of transatlantic crossings here, like this boat here was 1995, and then they did it again in 2006, and then 2017 and 2023. So they'll come back and redo, like if Prima 4 goes back to Horta, Michael will go find that and add another year on there. There are all kinds of these things everywhere, and this is just really incredible. Other really, really cool spot in Horta is this little cafe. It's called Peter's Cafe. Everybody stops there because they are huge supporters of the sailing community. So when you stop there, everybody goes there for breakfast or dinner or a beer or whatever. But I think the sailors really try to support Peter's Cafe because Peter's Cafe is a big supporter of sailors. In fact, the morning we were there, we were having breakfast, and they actually were awarding the winners of a race. These people had taken first place in a race. I think it went from Horta to Bermuda to a couple other places in the Caribbean and back up to Horta. And these guys took first in the race, and they were getting their award, and they were doing a live stream. It was really, really cool.
With things being a kind of commodity, what's the prices of fuel, a meal?
That meal there actually was pretty reasonable. I think I paid $7 for a couple of scrambled eggs, bacon, and avocado toast. It was pretty decent there.
So you buy fuel?
We did buy fuel. Fuel there was actually pretty cheap. To fill up the boat, and we put roughly 52 gallons of diesel in there, plus a couple of our 5-gallon jerry cans. I think we paid about $120. It really was not bad. And in fact, actually the repair on the bimini, speaking of prices of things, the repair on the bimini, like in Florida, I would have expected, they had the bimini for 2 days, I think. And in Florida, I would have expected to pay probably anywhere between $3 and $5 grand to get that fixed. It cost Michael $50. It was like, man, this is like I could live here.
We're just walking around.
We spent about 4 days in Horta doing repairs. And after 4 days, that time we were watching the weather, taking care of our repairs, and we said after about 4 days, things look good, we're gonna go ahead and move on. So the next 1,200 miles from Horta down to the port of Tangiers took us another 8 days to do that. The first 6 days of that, they weren't rough, but they weren't calm either. 4 to 6 foot seas, mostly coming from the side. So you got a lot of this going on, and we didn't see the sun for 6 days, which really, really sucked. It just, you wanted the sun, one, for the solar, but I tell you what, when you see the sun and you're out in the middle of the ocean, it's an uplifting thing. It really does bring your spirits up. And on day 7, when we saw the sun, it was like, oh wow, this is so great.
Is there supposed to be pirates around this area?
Not there. The biggest danger in this area is actually right up in this part of Spain and over here in that part of Portugal. And it's orcas that are attacking sailboats. They are attacking and breaking their rudders. So we deliberately, like, we could have cut over this way and then come down to the Straits of Gibraltar through that, but we deliberately avoided that because we did not want we didn't want it to be an orca incident. As we were approaching, Michael was debating a little bit about whether or not he wanted to go to Tangiers or Gibraltar. Gibraltar, just because it's in Europe and he'd be happy to be back in Europe again. Tangiers, though, is about 40 miles closer, and after 8 days or 6 days of side waves and not really comfortable sailing, days 7 and 8 got a lot better, but it was like, yeah, no, let's go to Tangiers. And he said this is also actually a nicer port. The other big reason he wanted to go there was because he didn't get to stop there when he went to the Caribbean. So he wanted to stop and see what it was really like. So as we were approaching on day 8, the left-hand side there is Portugal. The right-hand side is Morocco. So you'd sit on the front of the boat and you could see 2 continents at the same time. And this, kind of going back to your question about cargo ships, this is where things really did get busy, and not just with cargo ships, but you had little tiny fishing boats that would even come 40 or 50 miles offshore. And so somebody was always on watch at that point, because we, one, don't want to catch, we at this point are motoring, because like I said, we had to drop our mainsail because we were losing part of it. So we turned the motors on, but we also had the motors on to help a little bit with maneuverability, because when you got the motor going, you can make a hard right or you can make a hard left. You can do that with a sail, but it's a little bit more challenging, and we wanted to be able to avoid people. And those fishing boats actually tow fishing lines hundreds of feet behind them. And I will tell you from personal experience, the last thing you want to do is get one of those lines wrapped around your prop. I've had something similar happen on my boat, and it's not fun to try to fix that. So it became we're watching for fishing boats because we don't want to deal with this, and we also, like I said, really did not want to run into cargo ships either. In fact, actually, shortly after I took these pictures, I came back into the cockpit, the back area of the boat that's outside, and I'm sitting out there, and all of a sudden I hear this incredibly loud engine, and I'm like, what is that? And I jumped up and I turned around and looked. Probably not 500 yards from us is this huge cargo ship. And I'm like, Michael, did you know? And he said, oh yeah, I actually talked to them about a half mile ago, and we're good. We're just going to keep our course. They're going to keep theirs. They'll pass us. It'll all be fine. I was like, did you want to let me know that? I took a picture of it. I didn't include the picture because those pictures just don't do the size of those things justice compared to your boat. It's just, you look at them and you're like, they're just up there forever. They just seem to go forever. They're just huge. So as we were approaching, I decided took this shot just because even though it's a little ways before sunset, right, there's not a lot of folks that can say they have seen the sun both rise and set on the Atlantic Ocean. And this is one of the last times that I was going to see the sunset on the Atlantic. The next day, we were there. Shortly after this picture, we pulled into the harbor in Tangiers. It really was pretty cool getting there. Morocco is actually a fairly liberal Islamic country, so there are places like if you wanted to buy beer or alcohol, you could. Women aren't expected to cover up, things like that. It was a cool place to see. And when we got there, we started watching the weather and started looking at what about the leg from Tangiers over to Sardinia. And we were going to be sitting in Tangiers for probably about 6 days before the weather was going to be cooperative. And we said, I was talking to Michael, and it was like, he said, John, you got it. You helped us get through the worst of this, the Atlantic crossing. That's what we need the help with. He said, if you want to go back to the States now, it's okay, and I'm not going to hold it against you. So I went ahead. He and I talked a little bit more and decided that I would head back from Tangiers. So this is the last group shot, the last night. I flew out the next day. And actually, when I emailed my family to let them all know, and not just my wife and kids, but my parents and my brother were following along too. And I emailed them and said, hey, we got to Morocco, we're safe. Going to head into the Mediterranean, maybe here in about a week, but I'm going to head back, I think. And my dad immediately responds to me and says, so would you do it again? And I just replied and I said, well, Dad, the short answer is yes. And in fact, was about a week and a half later, I think, my wife Sandy and I actually flew down to Fort Lauderdale, picked up our son who lives in Fort Lauderdale, and then we drove down to Key West. We jumped on a friend's boat in Key West and helped them sail that boat down to Guatemala. So yes, I absolutely would do something like this again. It truly was an incredible experience. Just, I don't know, you look out, like I said, there were some times where it was like I'm looking out across the ocean and I'm like, what am I doing? But then there are times like when you see the orca or you see some of those sunsets, or it's like, yeah, this is incredible. I absolutely. But if I do it again, not if, when. When I do it again, I'm doing it this time with my wife. I want her to have that experience too, but it was hard, being apart we were apart for probably close to about 7 weeks, I think, before I got home. And we'd been spending the last 2 years prior to this pretty much together on a similar sized boat, and we were together 24/7. So, then you go to 7-8 weeks apart. It's like, yeah, this is not really what I want. Do you guys have any other questions for me? I kind of wraps things up for a little bit. Yeah. Most of the time when we were going from Virginia to the Azores, it was probably about 50 to 60 degrees. It was. And I had packed for probably 80 degrees. I did have a pair of sweatpants, and I had a thin sweatshirt, and I would wear those a lot. The nice thing is that because I obviously couldn't take, 6 weeks worth of clothes, this boat had a water maker, so we could take the salt water and turn it into fresh water. It also actually had a washing machine on board. So we were able to do laundry, and then we would just hang our laundry on the back of the boat, and like Jacob and I would do our laundry together, and Michael and Katie would do their laundry together, and we would do it in shifts because we didn't want to hang it across the sides much if we could, because if the wind's coming even kind of at a slight angle there, even with it clipped on there, you got a chance of losing your clothes. Whereas where it's on the back, we knew it would kind of just blow up a little bit and would stay on. So that was that, yeah. But it was, in fact, I had a fleece. I brought a fleece sleeping bag liner And there were several days actually where I would, when I was on shift, even 8 to 11 p.m., I was like, yeah, no, I'm going to be in this outside. And then I would carry it down with me at 11:30 or 12 when I would go to bed, and I would crawl back into it and sleep in that. But it was, and even Michael said, this is a lot colder than I was expecting. Because when he had gone from Europe to the Caribbean, he went from the Mediterranean, where it really was, 70, 80, 90 degrees sometimes, and they just went south. And they stopped in the Canary Islands, and then from the Canary Islands they went to, I don't remember which island in the Caribbean, but all you're doing is getting closer and closer to the equator, so it's just getting hotter and hotter. So he actually didn't really even know what to expect weather-wise. He and I, and a lot of days I'd be wearing shorts and a long sleeve shirt too, and I'm like, and they're like, John, do you want your sweatpants? I was like, yeah, I've been wearing them for 3 days straight now. It's time for something else.
The catamaran is not self-riding, is it?
No. Catamarans, unlike monohulls, which generally are self-riding, cats, generally speaking, are far less likely to end up in a position where they need the self-riding. I'm not saying they can't get into that position, but usually most catamarans, when you're sailing a cat, they call it heeling, so it starts, one of the hulls will start to come out of the water just a little bit. But they usually only come out maybe a foot, not very much, even in heavy wind. And you do, when you get really heavy wind, you do actually drop your mainsail a little bit to reduce the sail area, and you pull in your head sail, the front sail, to reduce sail area so that you're not going so fast, so that you're not heeling more than you should be. Monohulls, on the other hand, I mean, they're designed for that. I was on a monohull from Cayman Islands over to Jamaica. That's a whole nother story. But that we spent probably 2 days like at about a 30-degree angle, because the wind was just coming just perfect and we had great speed. And so the boat, like the deck, actually just would be getting splashed constantly on that side. But cats don't typically do that. Especially big ones like the Privilege or my boat, the Lagoon. They're really heavy boats, so 8 to 10 miles an hour is a pretty good speed for them, but they're not gonna heal very much.
Did you take any antiemetics in
Antiemetics.
for the seasickness?
No, actually, probably one of the biggest things. So we actually did get. In fact, the third day out, we all got sick. All 4 of us actually were leaning over the side of the boat at one point. But what I did for myself to deal with seasickness was I made sure that I was eating, I was drinking, plenty of water, and whenever I could, if we weren't playing card games, I would just rest, because that was the best way to do it.
On your back?
On my back, yep. Never went down into my cabin to rest if I was feeling sick, because laying on my back in the cockpit, I actually could look out and just see the horizon, and that would help. Probably 5 different occasions I did feed the fish, but it passed pretty quickly. One day I was cooking chili. Jacob had come out, and I just was sitting out there watching things go by, and Jacob says to me, "Hey John, do you mind coming in and cooking some chili?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, I can do that. That's not a big deal." So I went in and I'm cooking chili. I'm browning the meat. I'm throwing everything together, and I'm browning the meat, getting everything else mixed up. And I'm like, I looked up from the galley and I said, "Jacob, take over." And he's like, "What?" He said, "Are you okay?" And I didn't even answer. I just beeline for the back of the boat. and I heard him as I was making my way to the back of the boat. I heard him say, are you okay? And I heard Michael say, no, he's not okay. Get into the galley and finish cooking. So after I took care of my business, I went back in and helped finish up dinner, and then we all sat outside, and I had chili after that, which which you don't think is going to be a great thing for that, but it actually was like, oh, I'm feeling a lot better now. One of the other changes that I did make is prior to this trip, I used to drink probably 6, 8, 10 cups of coffee a day. And there on this trip, I probably went 2 or 3 days without any coffee. And I was like, wow, I can live without coffee. So I've really cut back. I'm down to 2 cups a day now after this. It was like, wow, not only can I cross the Atlantic Ocean, but I can do it without a lot of coffee too. Other questions? Yeah.
How often were you using the motor versus sailing?
Great, that's a great question. We actually, when I was just looking at this in my journal, we probably only motored a total of about 4 days, maybe 5. 4 days from Virginia to the Azores. We did motor probably that whole day, that whole last day going into Tangiers. That day we also did a little bit of what we call motor sailing. So we put the front sail out, the head sail, and used that just to kind of help get a little bit more speed. The engines were pushing us probably at about 7 knots or 8 miles an hour. And but then once we added the front sail, like that picked it up to 9 or 10 miles an hour. But we really sailed most of the time. It was kind of nice when we did run the motors, because that meant that you had hot water.
Oh, okay.
Because the hot water heater was attached to the motors. So, you know, those 4 days when we ran the motor, it was like, oh yeah, I'm making sure I'm taking a shower today because I can get some hot water here.
Because the hot water is the refrigerant? It's going to cool down the...
Right, yeah, yep. The coolant, the hot water heater, the coolant actually runs through the outside of the hot water heater, and it helps cool that coolant before it cycles back in. And so it's awesome. It's hot too.
And the heater too? I don't know if you use it, but the heater in the cabin?
We actually did not have a heater. If he had one, he never turned it on.
Oh, okay.
We just layered up and
That's it, yeah.
wore the sweatpants and stayed
The
in
fleece
the
liner.
fleece liner. Yeah. And you know, there were some days when it was nice and bright and sunny, when it was like, oh yeah, we can be outside here, and you could handle taking the cold shower. In fact, some days when it was nice and bright and sunny, the back of the boat here, let's see if I can get back here to this real quick. Right back here, this is called a sugar scoop, and on this side there actually is a shower hose, so that when you go swimming you can climb on board and just rinse all the salt water off. Well, on nice sunny, bright sunny days, even though we knew it was going to be a cold shower, you'd put your swimming trunks on and just go down onto the sugar scoop and shower out there. You're like, yeah, it's going to be cold, but it's been 2 days since I've showered, or 3 days, so it's time. But whenever those 4 times the engines ran, yeah, we made sure we took a shower, because even out there, he did have it plumbed for the hot water too. So, other questions? Yeah.
Is there any fishing?
We actually did. We did a lot of fishing. We only caught one. We caught probably, I would guess it was about a 10-pound skipjack tuna. And we looked at it and we're like, I said, I'm pretty sure that's a skipjack. And they're like, what's that? And I said, well, it's a tuna, but it's like in the lower end of the quality of tuna. And Katie, I think, did a quick Google search for skipjack tuna, and she's like, yeah, no, you should just throw it back. So we threw it overboard, and then we were really sad. We did, because we didn't catch any more the whole time. We just had a line trolling the whole time, and we would bring it in at night because, and I didn't mention this, I should have mentioned this earlier, but we broke our night shifts into 3-hour shifts. So I was 8 to 11, Michael was 11 to 2, Jacob was 2 to 5, and Katie was 5 to 8. But when you were on night shift, you were the only one who was up. So you really didn't want to have to try to deal with course corrections or sail adjustments or anything, and then all of a sudden, hear the high-pitched whine of the reel going out from a fish. So at nighttime, we always brought the line in because we always felt like it was a little bit safer that way. But yeah, in the morning, Jacob usually didn't go to bed right away. Even though his shift was over at 5 a.m., he'd sit up and talk with Katie for a while. And just before he'd go to bed, he'd look at me because I knew I was going to be the only one in the daylight for a little while, which was not a big deal. But he's like, do you care if I put the fishing line out? And I'm like, oh no, go ahead. I'll wake you up, because his hatch was right there not too far from the helm. So if I needed to, I could just pound on his hatch and say, hey, get up here and help me. But other questions? Yeah.
Did you share in all the cooking? And
We did, yep. And I was one of the things I noted in my journal that it was about day 13 we had run out of all of our fresh stuff. So 14 through 17 we were having canned goods and pasta. But we would all take turns and cook breakfast, or if you felt like having breakfast was a little bit different because people were going different directions, but dinner time, lunchtime, dinner time, and we didn't ever set a schedule. We never said, John, you're cooking lunch on this day and this day. It was one of those things where it was like, oh, I just noticed that Michael and Jacob both went and grabbed the big old can of peanuts or mixed nuts, and they're sitting there noshing on this. All right, guys, let's finish up this card game, and I'll go in and start cooking dinner. Or the one day where I was like making chili, they were inside playing cards. I was just needing not to play cards and being inside. I was needing to be outside, which I think is probably also why I was running partway through that cooking process. But yeah, man, we had chili, we had meatballs, we had spaghetti, we had lasagna. We actually, I think at one point even had an eggplant parmesan. It was like, yeah, when we were grocery shopping, it was, we're gonna make sure that we eat pretty well, because that's gonna be one of the few comforting things that, that we've got. But it was a lot of fun too, even sharing the cooking like that. The hard part was after we left Horta, our freezer went out on us. So we had 2 fridges, and the freezer was no longer functioning. So when he got to Tangiers, he had to get somebody should ask him. I don't know if he ever did find somebody or if he waited till he got to Italy, but had to have somebody come and fix that. But it was like, oh man, it was like, let's cook whatever meat we can right now, because we don't want to lose this stuff. And that, which actually, real quick, was another thing. When you're more than 5 miles offshore, food waste can actually just go overboard. So all of our food trash and other biological waste just went overboard. Just opened up what they call them through valves, so that when you went to the bathroom, it just goes right over, because it's going to sink to the bottom of the ocean and just decompose there. other garbage, plastic, that kind of stuff we put into a garbage sack. And we had some storage space in the engine compartments where we could put all of our trash. And then when we got to Horta, that actually became my job real quick, was grab the 2 trash bags and go find a garbage can. But that is, I mean, those kinds of things you really do, you gotta take care of those too, so. I've gone a little bit over the hour here. Does anybody have any other questions? I'm happy to answer more questions or, no. Well, thank you guys for coming. I do appreciate it. Thank you.